Hey everyone! I know it took me a while to finish this game, but this package was delivered by Donkey, so what can I say? In any case, as usual after finishing the game, let's check its story, gameplay, graphics and music. So let's begin. In this time around, and as usual of the Trails series, we begin with a small summary of what happened in the previous entry. You know how Agnés visited Van, how they ended up searching the artifacts, the way in which they get to know Mare, an advanced artificial intelligence who helped our group in multiple moments. After this small cinematic, we are shown a reddish version of Mare, who's able to bring a hellish Grendel. Time later, Swin and Nadia reach the scene. While taking a look around, they decide to contact Van, as they still owe him a favor. This is where we get to see the classic Sleepy Van in his office, being visited by Elaine. Cutting the chase here, she wants to talk about these incidents, where this creature reminiscent to Van's transformation, aka Grendel, has been taking down people all over the place, regardless of which side they serve. And while Van knew about those incidents, it was until those days that they got a small footage of this person. The main issue here is that people start kinda pointing to Van's direction, so this attracts the attention of some groups out there, and well, Van doesn't want the spotlight here, so this is how they start to look around for clues, ultimately finding this reddish Grendel. However, and unfortunately for our duo, this doesn't go as intended, being overpowered by this creature, confrontation that leads to a tragic end. Nonetheless, Agnés arrives to the scene, just to witness how Van takes one last breath. This is how Agnés' artifact somehow starts to function, and takes our duo several moments before this incident. What's interesting is that, after winding time, Van had little flashbacks of this event, and this is pretty much how everything starts to roll here, between little travels in time and the persecution of this new Grendel. So what can I say about this story? If you truly want to understand it, it is kinda important to play the previous Trails, like Trails in the Sky, to get the relationship with Rini. There's some minor details here and there about others, as some groups still pursued some ideas, but the next, let's say, important step is with Hajimari no Kiseki or Reverie, because this is where they start to link previous stories. Or you can also check a bit the before stories, and after each chapter, check some scenes where they put some things into context. While they are basic, that is a kind of shortcut if you don't want to play some previous games. Now, in all honesty, I don't mind what they try to pull here. Since the prequel, it looked like that was going to be the next step, considering that some characters start to take a bit the spotlight. But what I have to point out is how this tale was written. For that, we need to go back to the sketchboard, most likely since Falcom was debating how to continue the saga, because this whole crusade is about the fragments Agnés wants. But in the first, Kuro no Kiseki, they pretty much got all of them, aside from one. So the creative process to start sharing the story here feels a bit forced in multiple moments. With this, don't take me wrong, I don't mind having to go back and forth between different events or sometimes revisiting the same thing. I mean, it would be moronic from my side since I really like the games like Chrono Trigger, Raiden Historia and others I have shared in the channel. Fortunately, they don't take that much time to go around those paths, so I don't mind them. But the thing that grinds some gears is that the narrative takes a low hit, because everything starts to go around this last artifact, and how some other issues start to be linked or being forced to be linked here. In my humble opinion, I enjoy it, I am not gonna lie. However, there is this kind of feeling where I believe they could have done something much better here. And another unfortunate detail comes with the localization, which left things to be desired because plenty of times characters say one thing and what's shown is entirely different. And there isn't too much you can do because these games aren't fully voice acted. With that I mean in Japanese, so you can just listen to what they say and kinda avoid having to read. Considering all of those things, I wanna give this story an 8. I won't deny that the way in which the artifacts were acquired pretty much puts things on a tight spot here. But at the end of the day, I will say that there were some little twists that were entertaining, and while maybe I wasn't as engaged as in the previous story, I believe it was good. Gameplay wise, we follow a similar formula like in the prequel, In each chapter we have the opportunity to move around some areas, where we gather information, items, and do some sub-quests. These are kinda important parts, because you can get some things to prepare for some combats and challenging battles. However, a new area was introduced. Well, the idea already existed, but not to this extent. The Immersion Garden, where we can, let's say, try some floors, and within each area an objective has to be accomplished to move forward. Sometimes, let's say, break things, beat the small enemies and so on. What's useful from this place is that we can farm some levels and acquire some interesting things here and there. Once I start talking about the customization, I'll come back to this. But the deal is that it is an easy way to find nice equipment without that much of a deal, and in this case I believe it is a bit important, because along the journey you will play with many different characters, having to manage different strategies or synergies, particularly if you play in higher difficulties. Okay, my main problem with this game is that unfortunately it didn't add something really meaningful. The deal is that you will move around plenty of reused areas, which at the end of the journey feels a bit tiring considering that you played the prequel. On the other hand, it would have been better to traverse some other dungeons and things like that, because there is a point where it feels like you're just replaying things. Well, maybe not everything, a good chunk, yeah. Considering that if you did all the previous side quests and you do once again all side quests here, inevitably you run at least 4 or 5 times in the same place. It is worth mentioning that I don't really mind some of these events. For example, there is an event where you help Maxim, so yeah, it is relevant for these characters, but aside from that, there is no real reason to check the same place over again. Like, it is a big region, you know? You can always make a hidden lab out of nowhere. Now, while moving inside a dungeon, we can still use the same mechanics as before, having the chance to attack enemies prior to jump into the classic turn-based system. However, a new idea was added, in the form of magic uses, similarly as your physical attacks. Not that I use them that much, to be honest, but some enemies take much more damage if you attack them in that way. In any case, what's still useful is that you can stun enemies and then release shards. Here is where another mechanic comes into play, as you can trap multiple enemies within special skills once you boost your attacks, turning into the new way to finish battles really fast. On this front, depending from the enemy size, I recommend stunning them 1 or 2 times before releasing shards, because that way you can pretty much get them in one turn, saving plenty of time with a small fray. Where it isn't possible is of course against bosses or some specific battles, but here the deal is the same as before. Some characters have stronger magic moves, while others specialize in raw damage, and others in pretty much support, as they are kinda balanced. So it is important to know which role is being played by which character, and set things accordingly. While there are some broken setups, I know some of you will have fun figuring them out. Aside from that, what's worth doing is trying to align as many turns as possible before stunning an enemy, while also having some boost on your side. That way you can chew HP like mad. Otherwise, some enemies start to spam special moves, and it can be a bit hard to keep the whole team alive. Okay, fortunately I found most activities entertaining enough, as well as the new minigames. For example, where you play a la Metal Gear Solid 4, sneaking around. Yeah, for some reason I was like, flashbacks from this stupid place, that is annoying if you want to get the big boss title, particularly the bike chase. While the first ones were okay, time later I believe some were a lot of fun. Same with some hacking activities, where you need to move Mare around these places, particularly while pressing the right sequence of buttons. At least in my case, I believe they were entertaining. And having said all of that, what is the level of customization in Kuro no Kiseki 2? Okay, the same principle from the previous game applies, and I believe it is worth talking about it, because some characters can turn quite broken if you try to get some specific skills to recover CP, HP, or get multiple buffs while initiating a combat. And yeah, I know you can spend a good chunk of time here, but it is well worth the time, because sometimes dealing some extra damage from an offensive move is good to have. There is a new kind of customization found in the Martian Garden. Here you can find some items that work as, let's say, tokens to upgrade different characters' skills. If you want to upgrade everything, yeah, you will have to play quite a lot. Or just come every now and then, when new areas appear. In any case, it is quite useful to increase the effects of some buffs or moves, particularly those that increase CP, and so you can spam skills much more frequently, or those special moves from each character, but that depends if they are really useful as offensive units, or as a desperate move just in case. What's unfortunate about the Merchant Garden loot boxes is that you need to leave Edge pressed to get the goodies. If there is a way to use every token without having to look at this for lots of time, please, someone, just let us know. But if it doesn't exist, well, what can I say? The main reason to do this is because there's plenty of goodies, looks for your characters, and even tracks while playing in this place, so it is cool, but boring, having to be here for a while, especially if you farm multiple floors prior to try this activity, because it also increases your chances to get shinier stuff. Though well, considering all of these details, I won't deny that I had plenty of fun, so I wanna give it another 8. The base idea of Kuro no Kiseki 2 feels a bit more polished in comparison to the first game, and I also enjoy the fact that plenty of characters join relatively fast, and yeah, I like to manage multiple possibilities. Aside from that, I believe there were also plenty of details that left things to be desired, but I'll talk about them in the graphics. In this section I check glitches, performance, visuals, creative ideas and things like that. This is the PS5 version of the game, and I didn't get into glitches or details in detriment of the experience. In this system the game runs quite smoothly, and looks a bit better, at least in comparison to my experience last year with the first entry of the saga. But considering that this game runs similarly as the previous did in the Switch, then I will say that it is safe to get it. The general design is quite amazing. I mean, the attacks, actions while activating your special moves, cinematics where characters fight, and oh boy, I simply love them. Plenty of those scenes, those animations were quite amazing. In comparison to the prequel, I believe that here they were much better, and that is saying a lot, considering that in the first game some scenes were quite memorable too. However, where things start to go downhill is once the reuse stuff starts to take place. And don't get me wrong, I know Falcom doesn't have a huge team to develop areas as they please, but hear me out. Instead of having the Martian Garden, I'd prefer if they added some creative areas, as in the first game, because once I start to compare things here, unfortunately, Kuro no Kiseki 2 feels a bit bland. At least, putting things into perspective regarding the areas you visited in the first game. Some dungeons were way bigger in comparison to what's presented here. Then again, maybe the thing about having to go back to the sketchboard while the whole game was being written, unless it was done on the fly like we'll solve it on the go. I just hope that wasn't the case. While I loved multiple executions, creative ideas, cinematics and so on, I cannot let pass these kinds of things. So a 7.5 is good enough. I hope the next entry doesn't commit the same mistakes as what happened here. And last but not least, it's music. While Falcom used some tracks from the previous games, I believe most of them were on point. I am biased towards them because I like them, but also because they brought them back in a similar situation as in the previous game. So listening to Satisfied Madness was something I liked a lot. On this front, what's also cool is that in most scenes where our heroes talk for a while, they added more chill tracks, instead of looping the same one for like 10 times. So you start to listen to Cloudy Cloudy for example, to then change to Back Alley Sign, and then play Still By Your Side, giving these moments a well-deserved pace, because these conversations are quite entertaining for me. Nonetheless, sometimes the background music can grow a bit tedious, and this is where I believe that it is cool to have multiple options while reading for a while, considering that several interactions have no voice acting. And things do not end there, cause Kuro no Kiseki 2 soundtrack is composed by 90 tracks, going for around 3 hours and 45 minutes. So yep, it is a quite big soundtrack, which took a slightly different approach from the conventional Falcom execution, at least while talking about combat tracks. I mean, most of times they are neoclassic metal, but swinging a bit more into the melodic side. However, in this time, it was the other way around. Yes, they were neoclassic, but with an extra added of thrash metal, or some technical core. For example, Do or Die. Just listen to that little intro. Yeah, it isn't that usual to listen to something like that in Falcon games, but here some tracks followed a similar execution, and I simply love them. To me, the soundtrack is a 9. As the previous game, I also believe it is worth listening to it, even if you don't want to play the games. It may not be a masterpiece or as amazing as other Trails, but it was quite amazing. Kuro no Kiseki 2 final score is an 8.1. At the end of the day, I believe it was a good game. I definitely enjoy it, but it is fair to mention that it feels a bit bland, at least in comparison to the prequel, for the aforementioned topics of the artifacts, the way in which the narrative was pointed, and the lack of newer big areas to move around. But aside from that, some newer mechanics and minigames were fun to play, so while there are things to improve, I do recommend to give it a chance. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.